My name's Eric. I'm 27, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that family events bring out the absolute worst in people. You know those moments where everyone's dressed up, smiling for photos, pretending to be one big happy family. But underneath it all, you can feel the cracks? That was exactly the atmosphere at my sister's wedding. It was supposed to be her day, a celebration of love and joy. But for me, it turned into a night I'll never forget, and not for the reasons you'd expect. I'd always had a complicated relationship with my family. My sister, Emma, and I were close when we were kids, but as we grew older, it felt like I became more of an afterthought. She was the golden child, charming, outspoken, and always knew how to win people over. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved. I built my life step by step, working hard, keeping my head down. It didn't matter that I had built a stable career for myself or that I'd been the one to quietly pay for things in the family when money was tight. Somehow, none of that ever seemed to measure up in their eyes. Emma was the star, and I was just there. The wedding was extravagant, more than I expected, honestly. White roses lined the aisles, the tables shimmered under chandeliers, and everyone was dressed to the nines. I was happy for her, truly, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel like an outsider sitting at that family table. I caught snippets of conversations where relatives gushed about how beautiful Emma looked, how proud my parents must be, and how this day would go down as one of the best in family history. My name didn't come up once, not even in passing. I told myself I didn't care, that I was just there to support my sister. But deep down, the neglect stung more than I wanted to admit. Then came the toasts. The best man stood up, gave a heartfelt speech that had everyone laughing and dabbing at their eyes. My parents gave their blessings with warm smiles. Even my younger cousin, who had barely spoken to Emma in years, got up and rambled on about how proud he was of her. I sat there with my glass in hand, nerves crawling under my skin, debating whether I should stand and say something too. I wasn't much of a public speaker, but I wanted to. Emma and I had memories, real ones, that no one else could share. If nothing else, I wanted her to know that I was proud of her in my own quiet way. So I stood. I held my glass up, cleared my throat, and just as I opened my mouth, I heard a voice slice through the room like a knife. "Sit down, Eric. No one cares what you have to say." It was my uncle. Loud, sharp, cruel enough that people actually laughed. A few chuckles at first, then awkward glances when they realized he wasn't joking. The microphone hadn't even been in my hand, but his words carried clear enough that they might as well have been blasted through the speakers. My throat went dry. My hand trembled around the glass, the champagne rippling against the rim. I felt every set of eyes turn on me, not with warmth, not with curiosity, but with pity. Pity. For a moment, I thought about sitting back down, just swallowing it, pretending it didn't matter, letting the moment pass. But something in me shifted. The humiliation burned hotter than I'd ever felt before, crawling up my chest and making my ears ring. My uncle's smug grin, the way my father smirked at the remark instead of stepping in, the silence from my sister, it all sank into me like a stone. That's when I decided, in that very instant, that this night would not be remembered the way they thought it would. If they wanted to humiliate me, if they wanted to pretend I didn't matter, then I'd make sure they never forgot who I really was. I lowered the glass slowly, forcing my expression into something calm, almost unreadable. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it over the low hum of whispers around the room. My uncle had no idea what he'd just set in motion. None of them did. And that was the moment I began planning exactly how I'd make them all remember this night forever. I didn't sit down. Not right away. Instead, I forced a smile, the kind you wear when you've just been slapped across the face, but you don't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing you break. I looked at my uncle for a second longer than was comfortable, as if daring him to say it again, then quietly lowered my glass and returned to my seat. My heart was racing, my palms damp against the cool stem of the glass, but on the outside, I made sure I looked calm. That was my first small victory, not letting him see me crumble. The rest of the room, though, carried on like nothing had happened. That's what stung the most. The best man chuckled awkwardly and muttered something about keeping things moving. My dad leaned over to clap my uncle on the shoulder, like he'd just told the best joke of the night. My mom shook her head with a smile, whispering, "Oh, that's just how he is, Eric. Don't take it so seriously." Even Emma didn't step in. She just looked down at her bouquet and gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind you give when you don't want to ruin your makeup by frowning too hard. I sat there, the champagne untouched, my mind replaying the moment over and over like a loop I couldn't turn off. I thought about every family gathering before this one. Every time my uncle dismissed me, every time my dad compared me to someone else, every time my mom told me I should just let things go. And here it was again, amplified in front of 100 people. As the night moved on, little things piled on top of each other, making the sting sharper. When the photographer came around to snap pictures of the family, I stood up, ready to take my place beside my sister. But my dad waved me off. "Just the important ones first," he said with a grin, ushering my uncle, aunt, and cousins into the shot while I stood off to the side, pretending to check my phone. By the time I was finally called in, it was more of an afterthought, like they were adding me in just so no one could say I'd been excluded entirely. At the dinner table, the favoritism was blatant. My uncle was seated right at the head with my parents, laughing loudly, retelling the same stories I'd heard 100 times. I was placed 2 tables away, squeezed in with distant relatives who barely remembered my name. When I finally tried to join a conversation at my parents' table, my uncle cut across me again, raising his voice so mine was drowned out completely. "No offense, Eric," he said loudly, "but some of us are actually interesting." That got him another round of laughs. And Emma? She didn't say a word. She just smiled that practiced smile of hers and let it happen. The real blow, though, came during the bouquet toss. I'd stepped back to give the women space, but I couldn't help overhearing my mom's voice carry across the room. "I'm just so proud of Emma," she gushed to a family friend. "She's always been the shining star." Eric, well, he's fine, but you know how it is. Some kids just make you proud in a different way. I froze, my chest tightening as though someone had gripped my lungs. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but hearing it in that moment, on this night, when I was already raw and humiliated, it cut deeper than ever before. I excused myself, slipping out onto the balcony for air. The night sky stretched above me, clear and cold, the laughter and music muffled behind the glass doors. I gripped the railing, breathing slowly, trying to shake the anger that buzzed under my skin. I told myself I shouldn't let it get to me, that this was Emma's day, not mine. But the truth? I couldn't stop replaying it all. The toast I never gave, the photos I wasn't in, the mocking laughter, the words, "No one cares what you have to say." I realized then that this wasn't just one bad night. This was years of being dismissed, belittled, and overlooked, all boiling over. And the more I thought about it, the more one thought solidified in my mind. If they wanted to treat me like I was invisible, then I was going to make sure they'd never forget me. Not after tonight. And as I stood out there in the cold, my uncle's voice echoing in my head, I started thinking about exactly how I'd do it. When I finally went back inside, the ballroom was buzzing with music and laughter. The band had started playing one of those songs everyone knows the words to, and people were shouting along, drinks in hand, shoes already kicked off under tables. For a moment, I thought maybe I could just blend back in, ride out the rest of the night quietly, and leave early. But fate has a cruel way of circling back around just when you think you've escaped. The family speeches portion wasn't officially over. After the cake cutting, Emma's new husband's parents gave another toast, and then a few relatives started chiming in with short blessings and jokes. That's when my uncle, clearly drunk but still steady enough to command the room, decided to take the mic again. "I just want to say," he began, his voice booming over the speakers, "that tonight is about Emma. She's always been the heart of this family, the one we're proud to show off. And frankly," he glanced toward me, smirking, like he was about to serve himself a second helping of humiliation, "it's nice to have a child worth celebrating." The crowd laughed. Loud, unrestrained laughter this time. People clapped. A few even raised their glasses. I froze in my chair, every muscle in my body tightening. He had said it directly this time, not disguised as a joke, not hidden under clever phrasing. A child worth celebrating, which meant, of course, that I wasn't. I looked at my parents, hoping, just for once, they'd shut him down. But my father actually nodded, grinning like my uncle had just spoken a universal truth. My mother leaned toward him and whispered something that made him laugh harder. Even Emma, my sister, the one whose day this was, the one I thought might at least step in to keep things from getting uglier, simply lowered her eyes, fiddling with her ring, and let the silence stretch. That was the moment something in me snapped. Because it wasn't just the toast, or the laughter, or even my parents' silence. It was everything behind it. The years of being invisible. The childhood memories where Emma got the bigger presents, the louder praise, the gentler punishment. The teenage years where every accomplishment of mine was met with "that's nice, but look what Emma did." The college graduation where my parents barely showed up, but flew across the country for one of Emma's work promotions. And now, at her wedding, when I had stood up to say something kind, something from the heart, I had been told to sit down because no one cared. I realized then that it wasn't about Emma's day, or keeping the peace, or letting things slide because that's just how Uncle is. It was about the fact that they didn't respect me. They never had. And if I didn't do something, they never would. The emotional turning point came seconds later. I don't even think my uncle realized how far he'd gone, but he sealed it when he leaned into the mic and added, with a sloppy grin, "Maybe one day Eric will give us something to celebrate. But I won't hold my breath." The crowd roared again. My dad clapped the table, red in the face from laughing so hard. And I sat there with my hands gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles went white, my mind spiraling between rage and hurt. My chest burned. My ears buzzed. That was it. That was the breaking point. Not just humiliation anymore, betrayal. Betrayal from the people who were supposed to defend me, to at least offer me dignity, if nothing else. My uncle's cruelty was one thing. My parents' agreement with him was another. Emma's silence, that was the knife in my back. I didn't stand up. Not yet. I didn't storm out, didn't yell, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Instead, I forced my body to stay perfectly still, my expression carefully blank. Because in that moment, with the music rising again and the clinking of glasses all around me, I realized something important. I finally knew exactly where I stood with my family. And knowing that gave me power. I looked down at the untouched champagne in my hand, the bubbles fizzing quietly, and I made a decision. If they wanted to laugh, if they wanted to pretend I was nothing, then I would give them a reason to remember me for the rest of their lives. The plan wasn't clear yet, but the intent was. And as I sat there, every cruel word echoing in my mind, I began to map out how this night would end, on my terms, not theirs. I stayed in that chair longer than I should have, my champagne still untouched, the bubbles long gone flat. The music swelled back into the room. Laughter picked up again, and people drifted toward the dance floor as if nothing had happened. To everyone else, it was just another speech, another joke at my expense. But inside me, it felt like something had splintered. I didn't feel anger anymore, not in the sharp, burning way I had a few minutes before. Instead, it was something colder, heavier. I excused myself quietly, slipping away from the table without anyone noticing. Or maybe they did notice, and they just didn't care. That was the part that sank the deepest, realizing that if I left entirely, if I walked out into the night and never came back, the only reaction I'd get would be a shrug or another joke. For the first time, I truly felt invisible, like a ghost drifting through the edges of my own family. I ended up in a small lounge off to the side of the ballroom. Dim lighting, plush chairs, and just enough quiet that I could hear my own thoughts again. I sat down heavily, running my hands through my hair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I thought about the toast I'd wanted to give, how I had planned to remind Emma of the summer nights we used to stay up late talking about our futures, or the way she used to braid my hair when we were kids, or how proud I really was that she had found someone who loved her enough to stand at the altar with her. I had wanted to give her something meaningful, something she'd carry into her marriage. Instead, my words had been stolen before they ever left my mouth. That was my rock bottom, realizing not only that my family didn't care, but that my own sister didn't care enough to stop them. The night blurred from there. I wandered between the lounge and the balcony, occasionally drifting back into the ballroom just to watch from the edges. I saw my uncle laughing at the center of every conversation. I saw my parents proudly parading him around like he was the star of the show. I saw Emma dancing with her husband, glowing under the lights, her eyes never once searching for me in the crowd. And every time I slipped out of sight again, it felt easier, like I was training myself to disappear altogether. But disappearing wasn't what I wanted. Not really. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, to know what it was like to be silenced, dismissed, cut out of the picture. I wanted them to sit with the weight of their own cruelty, the way I had sat with it all my life. I didn't know how yet, but sitting in that quiet lounge, watching the shadows move across the walls, a strange calm began to settle over me. My humiliation had hit its peak, my heart had broken, and now all that was left was a sharp, deliberate clarity. If I couldn't have a place in their family the way things were, then I would carve out a place in a way they would never forget. I pulled out my phone and scrolled absently, not looking for anything in particular. But my mind was working in the background, faster and sharper than it had in years. Little details from the night began to stitch themselves into something bigger. My uncle's arrogance, my parents' favoritism, Emma's silence, all of it was fuel. And though I didn't have the full picture yet, the seed of a plan was starting to take root. When I finally returned to the ballroom, I didn't try to rejoin the family table. I stayed near the edges, watching, waiting, keeping my thoughts to myself. No one came looking for me. No one asked where I'd been. That hurt. Yes, but it also told me something important. They weren't paying attention. Which meant when I finally moved, when I finally acted, it would blindside them completely. I raised the flat champagne to my lips, swallowed it in one bitter gulp, and let the glass fall back to the table with a quiet clink. In that moment, I promised myself I wouldn't be invisible anymore. The days after the wedding felt like walking through fog. My phone buzzed with group chats full of photos and inside jokes from the night, and each time I scrolled through them, I saw myself missing from frame after frame. My uncle's arm was around Emma in half of them, my parents beaming in the background, cousins clinking glasses. If I appeared at all, it was on the edge, blurry, half-turned, like I was just a stranger who'd wandered into the shot. Nobody messaged me directly, not even Emma. Not a thank you for coming, not a sorry about what happened, not even a throwaway emoji. Silence. I won't lie, it crushed me at first. For a few weeks, I drifted. I went to work, came home, kept to myself. I replayed the humiliation over and over, wondering if I should have shouted back, if I should have made a scene to prove I wasn't weak. But eventually, something shifted. The silence gave me clarity. And in that clarity, I started focusing on myself in a way I never had before. See, I had been coasting for years, doing fine, paying my bills, showing up for a job I was good at but not passionate about. But the wedding lit a fire under me. That moment, being told, no one cares what you have to say, dug into me so deeply that it became a challenge I couldn't ignore. If they didn't care, then I would give them no choice but to care. So I worked, quietly, steadily, relentlessly. I poured myself into my career, volunteering for projects no one else wanted, staying late, sharpening my skills. I networked outside of work, too, building connections that didn't tie back to my family's circle. Within a year, I got promoted. Then promoted again. My salary doubled, then nearly tripled. I moved into a sleek apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place I used to drive past and wonder what it would be like to live there. But it wasn't just money. I grew in confidence. I started working out, not because anyone told me to, but because I wanted to feel strong in my own skin. I made friends outside of my family, people who actually valued my presence, who laughed at my jokes instead of talking over me. For the first time in my life, I stopped measuring myself by the yardstick my parents and uncle had shoved in my face. I was free. Emma, meanwhile, drifted in and out of my periphery. I saw her posts online, the honeymoon pictures, the first house with her husband, the smiling family dinners where my seat was conspicuously empty. We didn't talk much. And when we did, it was shallow. She never brought up the wedding. She never apologized. Part of me had hoped she would, but another part knew better. What surprised me, though, was how often my parents started reaching out once my career took off. It began with casual texts, "How's work? We should get together soon." Then it escalated into dinner invitations, thinly veiled questions about how much I was earning, little comments about how successful you've become, Eric. It was flattering, in a bitter sort of way, but I saw through it. They weren't proud. They were curious. Curious what they could gain. The first real test came at Thanksgiving, 2 years after Emma's wedding. I showed up in a tailored suit, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. My uncle was there, of course, holding court at the head of the table, but this time when he smirked at me, it didn't sting. If anything, I felt a strange satisfaction in watching his eyes flicker over the watch on my wrist, the car keys I set down casually beside my plate. "Oh, Eric," he said, raising his glass with that same oily grin. Glad to see you finally doing something with yourself." This time, I didn't flinch. I smiled back, slow and measured, and replied, "Glad you noticed." It wasn't revenge yet, not even close, but it was the first time the balance of power tilted, even just slightly, in my favor. I could feel it in the way the room shifted, the way my parents leaned in to ask me about my job, the way my uncle suddenly seemed eager to hear about the projects I was working on. That's when I realized they had underestimated me for years. And now, for the first time, I held something they wanted. I didn't give it to them. Not yet. I just let the silence hang, let them wonder how far I'd climbed, how much further I could go. Because I knew, deep down, that the time would come when I could use all of this, the success, the distance, the power I had built, to turn the tables completely. And when that moment came, I wasn't going to hold back. It was subtle at first, the way the shift happened. My family's calls, once rare and dismissive, became more frequent. My dad would ring me on Sunday mornings, his voice casual but laced with questions. "How's work, son?" "Still climbing that ladder." My mom started dropping hints about the old house needing a little renovation, slipping in comments about how much it would cost. Even Emma, who had barely spoken to me since her wedding, sent a text one evening. "Hey, we should catch up soon. It's been too long." I knew what it meant. They had seen the changes, my lifestyle, my success, the way people outside our family began to respect me. I wasn't invisible anymore, at least not in the way I had been before. But they didn't want me because they suddenly cared. They wanted me because I had something to offer. The confirmation came one night at dinner. My parents had invited me to a family meeting, which already set off alarms in my head. I arrived to find my uncle there too, grinning like always, Emma beside him with that perfect practice smile. The table was set neatly, wine glasses filled, as though they were preparing to celebrate something. But the celebration wasn't mine. After some polite chatter, my dad finally cleared his throat. "Eric, we're so proud of how far you've come. Truly, you've made something of yourself, and it hasn't gone unnoticed." He paused for effect, his eyes flicking to my uncle, then back to me. "Which is why we think you'd be the perfect person to help us with a little project." My uncle leaned in, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on some grand secret. "It's about the family business. We've had some financial strain lately. Nothing major, just a temporary setback. But with your position, your contacts, maybe even a small investment." He let the words hang in the air, as if waiting for me to jump at the chance to prove myself useful. I stayed silent, swirling the wine in my glass, letting the weight of their words settle. An investment. That's what this was about. Not pride. Not love. Money. Emma chimed in then, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "It would mean a lot, Eric. You know how important stability is for the family. If you could just help us through this rough patch, it would bring us all closer together again." Closer together. The words made my stomach turn. For years, they had pushed me to the edges, mocked me, silenced me. And now, when their empire was wobbling, I was suddenly the perfect person. I smiled, slow and deliberate, and asked for details. Not because I intended to hand them a cent, but because information was power. As they spoke, numbers, debts, desperate plans, I listened carefully, filing it all away. My uncle boasted too much, as he always did, and in his arrogance, he revealed cracks I hadn't known were there. His business wasn't just struggling, it was crumbling. My parents were tied into it, financially and reputationally. Emma, too, had invested some of her husband's money. If it went down, it would drag them all with it. By the time dessert was served, I had everything I needed. I smiled politely, promised to think about it, and excused myself early. On the drive home, the city lights flickering past my windshield, I felt a cold satisfaction settle into me. They weren't invincible anymore. They were vulnerable, and they had just handed me the keys to their weak spots. That night, I opened my laptop and began researching. Connections, legal documents, financial records. All of it was easier to access than I'd expected, especially with the information my uncle had carelessly let slip. Each piece fit into a larger puzzle, and the more I uncovered, the more I realized just how much control I could have if I wanted it. For the first time in my life, the power dynamic had flipped completely. I wasn't the overlooked kid at the family table anymore. I wasn't the one told to sit down because no one cares what you have to say. I was the one holding the truth, the one with the ability to decide their future. And the best part? They had no idea. I didn't rush. That was the difference between anger and strategy. Anger makes you act in the moment, loud and sloppy, but strategy? Strategy waits. I let months pass after that dinner. My family kept circling back, each time with the same sugary smiles, the same veiled requests. Any updates on that help we talked about, Eric? My dad would ask casually. Emma's husband even called me once, trying to pitch the investment opportunity like I was some clueless banker who'd never seen a balance sheet before. I played along, nodded at dinners, answered politely, but never gave them a straight yes or no. The longer I kept them guessing, the more desperate they became. And during that time, I quietly moved my pieces into place. Through my work, I had made connections with people who specialized in, let's just say, corporate cleanups. For the right price, they could untangle any financial mess or, conversely, expose one to the public in ways that couldn't be ignored. I didn't even have to do much digging myself. Once I hinted at what I knew, the information practically poured in. My uncle's business wasn't just crumbling, it was rotten to the core. Shady bookkeeping, unpaid loans, and deals that would have regulators salivating if they ever came to light. And my parents? They had co-signed on more than one of those loans. Emma and her husband's names showed up, too. Piece by piece, I built a full picture of their empire and how fragile it really was. The first move was subtle. I let it slip, through a carefully chosen mutual acquaintance, that my uncle's company might be in trouble. Within weeks, whispers spread. A client backed out of a contract. A small investor pulled their support. My uncle blamed market changes, but the cracks were widening. The second move was a conversation. I invited Emma to lunch, just the two of us, for the first time since her wedding. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her napkin, probably wondering if I was finally going to agree to bail them out. Instead, I smiled and asked her how much she and her husband had tied up in Uncle's company. Her eyes widened just a fraction, enough for me to know she hadn't expected me to know. I didn't press. I just let the silence linger, then changed the subject, leaving her to stew in the knowledge that I was aware of far more than she realized. The third move was the real blow. With the help of my connections, I funneled the information I had collected into the hands of someone who would make use of it. A journalist who had been sniffing around the local business scene for months. I didn't even have to sign my name. All it took was an anonymous packet, documents, timelines, numbers that didn't add up, and within weeks, the first article hit the press. Local family business under fire for financial misconduct. The headline exploded. Clients fled. Partners demanded answers. My uncle tried to laugh it off, to insist it was fake news, but the article included receipts. Actual receipts. The kind you couldn't spin your way out of. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, calm as ever. My parents called me frantically when the news broke, voices high and panicked, asking if I knew anything. I kept my tone even, sympathetic even. That's awful. I hope you'll be okay. Emma texted me late one night, a single desperate line. Did you do this? I didn't reply. The fallout was swift. Contracts canceled, debts called in, reputations shredded. My uncle went from swaggering at the head of every family table to hiding behind lawyers and excuses. My parents, who had tied their finances to his, scrambled to cover losses, selling off assets they had bragged about for years. And Emma's marriage strained under the weight of the money they had poured into what turned out to be a sinking ship. And through it all, I stayed perfectly composed. Attending family gatherings when invited, listening quietly as they whispered about their bad luck, offering nothing but a polite smile when my uncle tried to blame the world for his downfall. I never raised my voice. I never gloated. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in rubbing it in. It was in the silence, in watching them finally face the humiliation they had once so freely heaped on me. They had told me, at my sister's wedding, that no one cared what I had to say. Now, every whispered conversation in that family carried my shadow. Every glance in my direction was tinged with suspicion, fear, and the bitter acknowledgement that they had underestimated me. And that was exactly the way I wanted it. The fallout didn't just ripple through my family. It tore through them like a storm. The business, once my uncle's pride and joy, collapsed faster than anyone expected. Within months of that first article, regulators swooped in, auditors poured through records, and lawsuits started piling up. My uncle, the man who once stood at the head of every table with a booming voice and smug grin, was reduced to a ghost of himself. I'll never forget seeing him at a family gathering months later, thinner, shoulders slumped, his laugh gone. He barely looked at me. For the first time in my life, I think he was afraid of me. My parents didn't fare much better. Their finances, tied so tightly to his crumbling empire, drained quicker than they could patch the holes. The house they had flaunted for years went up for sale. Vacations disappeared. The proud, untouchable facade cracked until all that was left was desperation. And suddenly, those Sunday morning calls turned from casual check-ins to outright pleas. "Eric, can you help us? Just until we get back on our feet." But the thing about asking for help is that it has to be built on respect, on love. They had given me neither. Emma's fallout was quieter, but in some ways harsher. Her husband had trusted her when she urged him to invest in the family business. When it all collapsed, so did his trust in her judgment. Their arguments spilled into public view, whispers reaching me through the grapevine. By the time I invited her to coffee again, the light in her eyes was dimmer, her voice brittle. "You knew, didn't you?" she said, not even asking. "You could have warned me." I stirred my drink calmly before answering. "I tried to speak once. You let them silence me." She didn't argue. She just lowered her gaze. And for once, there was no smile to hide behind. The most striking part of it all was the silence that followed. For years, I had been the quiet one, the afterthought, the one they dismissed at every turn. Now, the roles had reversed. At gatherings, they tread lightly around me, conversations halting when I entered the room. The man who once told me, "No one cares what you have to say," avoided eye contact altogether. My parents, once so quick to parade my sister and uncle as their pride, now stumbled over their words when trying to compliment me, unsure how far they could go without sounding insincere. And I stayed calm, always calm. I didn't need to gloat or remind them of the past. They remembered. Every time their eyes met mine, they remembered. The final moment came at another wedding, not Emma's this time, but a cousin's. During the reception, the DJ invited family members to share toasts. I stayed seated at first, sipping my drink, letting the familiar nervous energy ripple through the room. And then, slowly I stood, the same way I had years ago at Emma's wedding. But this time, no one interrupted. No one dared. My uncle kept his head down. My parents watched me nervously. Emma sat rigid, hands clasped in her lap. I raised my glass, my voice steady, measured, calm. "To family," I said simply. "The people who remind us who we are, even when they don't mean to. And to those of us who had to learn the hard way that being silenced only makes your voice louder when the time finally comes." The room was silent. No laughter, no interruptions, just silence. And in that silence, I saw it land. The weight of it, the truth of it. I took a sip, set down my glass, and sat back down. For the first time in my life, they listened, and they would never forget.